Everybody keeps saying the same thing. That LeBron James is the most complete player we've ever seen. Bigger, faster, smarter than anyone before him. And for years, that conversation has only gone one direction. But then out of nowhere, a voice from a completely different era stepped in and flipped the entire narrative. We're talking about Bill Laimbeer. And he didn't just disagree. He basically said everything people believe about modern greatness might be built on the wrong foundation. No hesitation. No filter. Just straight to the point. Guys like LeBron wouldn't survive one night in our era. Not compete. Not dominate. Not struggle. Survive. Let that sink in for a second. Because this isn't some random hot take floating around social media. This isn't a casual fan trying to go viral. This is someone who played in one of the most physical, unforgiving eras the game has ever seen. Someone who didn't just witness it, but helped define it. And now he's looking at today's game and calling it soft. Calling today's superstars untested. Calling into question whether greatness today even means the same thing it used to. And the wild part is, he didn't stop at LeBron. He brought Kevin Durant into it too. One of the most unstoppable scorers we've ever seen. A player who can drop 40 on anyone, anytime, anywhere. And still, according to Laimbeer, not built for what the game used to be. Now think about what that really does. Because the moment you hear something like that, you're forced to pick a side. Either you believe today's players are more skilled, more advanced, better in every way, or you start wondering if they've been protected from something real, something harsher, something that can't be measured with stats or highlights. And that's where this stops being just another basketball debate. Because now it's not just about who's better. It's about what greatness actually means. Is it dominance in your era? Or is it surviving any era? And that question doesn't have an easy answer. Because on one side, you've got LeBron. 20+ years. Still elite. Still carrying teams. Still doing things nobody at his age has ever done before. On the other side, you've got voices like Laimbeer, coming from a time where stepping on the court wasn't just about skill, it was about whether you could handle what came with it. The contact, the pressure, the constant tests. So when someone like him speaks up now, in 2025, and says what he said, it hits different. Because whether you agree with it or not, you can't ignore it. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. To really understand why that statement hits so hard, you have to understand who Bill Laimbeer actually was when he stepped on an NBA floor. Because if you only know him from highlights or the occasional clip, you're missing the full picture. This wasn't just another big man from the past. This wasn't some quiet role player blending into a system. Laimbeer was chaos. He was the kind of player that didn't just beat you on the scoreboard. He made you question whether you even wanted to be out there in the first place. Night after night, he walked into arenas where entire crowds already hated him before the game even started. Not disliked. Not booed casually. Hated. And he leaned into it. That was the identity of those Detroit Pistons teams. The Bad Boys. A group that didn't just play basketball, they imposed themselves on the game. And Laimbeer was right in the middle of it. He wasn't the fastest guy on the court. He wasn't jumping out of the gym. He wasn't crossing defenders or putting up flashy highlights. But what he understood better than almost anyone was control. Not just control of the game, control of people. He knew how to get under your skin, how to frustrate you, how to turn one possession into a mental battle that stayed with you the rest of the night. And if that didn't work, he had no problem making it physical. We're talking about an era where if you drove into the paint, you weren't just trying to score, you were making a decision. A real one. Because there was always a chance you weren't landing clean. And Laimbeer made sure of that. Hard fouls weren't accidents. They were messages. Every hit meant something. Every collision had a purpose. You don't like it? That was the point. Players today get technicals for things that were considered normal back then. Trash talk that would get you fined now was just part of the conversation in those games. And Laimbeer thrived in that environment. He didn't just accept being the villain. He built his entire career on it. Even legends felt it. Michael Jordan himself admitted how much he hated those Pistons teams. Not just losing to them, but dealing with them. Because they didn't just try to beat you. They tried to break your rhythm. Break your confidence. sometimes break your will. That's the mindset Laimbeer comes from. That's the version of basketball he lived through. So when someone like that looks at today's game, at players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant, he's not just comparing stats. He's comparing environments. He's comparing what it felt like to step onto that court knowing that every possession could turn into something personal. Knowing that respect wasn't given because of talent, it was taken through confrontation, through endurance, through proving over and over again that no matter what happened to you, you were still going to show up the next night. That's the lens he's speaking from. And once you really see it like that, his words start to carry a completely different weight. Now here's where the conversation really starts to shift, because to even judge what Bill Laimbeer is saying, you have to step into two completely different versions of basketball that almost feel like two different sports. The game he came from, and the game we're watching today. Back in that era, the court wasn't spaced the way it is now. There weren't shooters pulling defenders out to 30 feet. The paint was crowded, physical, and unpredictable. If you drove inside, you weren't gliding to the rim for a clean finish. You were entering traffic. And not just any traffic, the kind where bodies were waiting for you. Hand-checking was part of the game. Defenders could guide you, lean on you, disrupt your rhythm before you even got into your move. There was constant contact, constant resistance, and it didn't stop once you got past your man. That was just the beginning. Because once you reached the paint, that's where players like Laimbeer lived. That's where the real test started. No restricted area. No automatic whistles. No instant reviews protecting you midair. If you went up, you better be ready for what came next. And everybody knew it. That's why scoring inside wasn't just about skill, it was about courage. Now fast forward to today's game, where players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant dominate in a completely different environment. The floor is spaced. The pace is faster. The game is built around movement, efficiency, and precision. Instead of fighting through bodies every possession, you're navigating angles, reading defenses, exploiting mismatches. Rules have evolved. Freedom of movement is emphasized. Certain types of contact that were normal before are now instant fouls. And that changes everything. Because now the challenge isn't just about absorbing punishment, it's about mastering timing, skill, and decision-making at a higher speed than ever before. You can't just compare the two directly. In one era, the question was, can you take the hit and keep going? In the other, it's, can you process the game faster than everyone else on the court? And both of those are real challenges. Both demand greatness, but they demand it in completely different ways. That's why this debate never lands clean. Because when Laimbeer looks at today's players, he sees less physical resistance, fewer consequences for attacking the basket, and a system that protects its stars. But when you look at modern players, you see something else entirely. You see players covering more ground, making quicker decisions, handling more complex defenses, and doing it all under a level of global attention that didn't exist back then. So now you've got two realities, two standards, two definitions of what it means to be dominant. And the more you try to compare them, the more complicated it gets. And then, right when the conversation feels like it's just another comparison between eras, that's when Bill Laimbeer dropped the line that changed everything. No build-up, no hesitation. Guys like LeBron James and Kevin Durant wouldn't survive one night playing against us. That wasn't analysis. That was a challenge. And the moment you hear it, everything shifts. Because now it's not about pace or spacing or rule changes anymore. Now it's personal. Now it's about toughness, about identity, about whether the players we call great today could handle something raw and unforgiving. He didn't say they wouldn't score. He didn't say they wouldn't be good. He said they wouldn't survive. One night. Think about how extreme that sounds. You're talking about LeBron, one of the most physically dominant players the game has ever seen. A player built like a linebacker, moving like a guard, controlling games in ways we've never really seen before. And KD? A 7-footer with guard skills, a scorer who can shoot over anyone, anywhere, anytime. And still, not built for that environment? That's what makes the statement hit. Because it goes directly against everything we've been told about modern greatness. It ignores stats. Ignores championships. ignores longevity, and replaces all of that with one question. What happens when the rules disappear? What happens when the game isn't protecting you? What happens when every possession feels like a test? That's the image Laimbeer is forcing into your head. A version of basketball where the first quarter isn't about rhythm, it's about setting a tone. Where the second quarter isn't adjustments, it's pressure building. And by the third, you're not just thinking about the game anymore, you're thinking about the next hit. That's what he's implying. That before LeBron even gets comfortable, before Cade even finds a rhythm, something changes. Physically, mentally. And once that shift happens, the game doesn't look the same anymore. Now whether you agree with that or not isn't even the point yet. Because the real power of what he said is this. You can't prove it wrong. There's no footage, no crossover era, no way to test it. All you can do is imagine it. And once that image is in your head, it stays there. And this is where Bill Laimbeer doesn't just leave it as a wild statement. He backs it with a way of thinking that the more you sit with it, the harder it becomes to completely dismiss. Because in his mind, this isn't about disrespect. It's about context. He's looking at today's game and seeing layers of protection that simply didn't exist when he played. Not just rules on paper, but how those rules are enforced. Back then, contact wasn't something you argued about. It was expected. If you drove into the lane, you knew there was a price. And it wasn't always a foul. Sometimes it was just a hit you had to absorb, get up from, and keep playing like nothing happened. That was normal. And over time, that kind of environment does something to players. It changes how you think. It changes how you approach every possession. Because now you're not just reading defenses, you're calculating risk. Is this drive worth it? What's waiting for me if I go up? And once those questions start creeping in, your game shifts, even if you don't realize it. That's the pressure Laimbeer is talking about. Not just physical, mental. The kind that builds slowly, possession after possession, until it's not even about the score anymore. It's about endurance. Now compare that to what players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant experience today. Yes, the game is faster. Yes, the skill level is higher in many ways. But the consequences of contact are different. There are rules designed to protect shooters, to protect players in midair, to reduce the kind of collisions that used to define games. And because of that, players can operate with a different level of freedom, a different kind of confidence. You can attack knowing there's a safety net. You can play through contact knowing it's likely going to be called. And that changes the rhythm of the game. Laimbeer's argument is that when you remove that safety net, everything changes. Not just physically, but psychologically. Because now, every mistake has a cost. Every drive becomes a decision. And every moment of hesitation gets exposed. He even pointed out something subtle that a lot of people overlook. Back then, showing weakness, even for a second, meant something. If you stayed down too long after a hit, if you reacted the wrong way, if you gave any sign that something affected you, teams noticed. Players remembered. And they came back to it. Again and again. Until you proved you could handle it. That was the test. And in his eyes, players today haven't had to go through that same kind of test. Not because they couldn't, but because the game doesn't demand it anymore. And that's the key difference he keeps circling back to. It's not about talent. It's about exposure. About what you've actually been forced to deal with over and over again. So when he says what he said, he's not just imagining a different version of LeBron or KD. He's imagining them in a system where the conditions change completely. Where the space shrinks. Where the contact increases. Where the mental pressure builds in a way that doesn't show up in box scores. And his belief is simple. Until you've been through that, you don't really know how someone would respond to it. And that uncertainty is what keeps this whole argument alive. And this is where the conversation stops being just about LeBron James or Kevin Durant and starts spreading across the entire league. Because once a statement like that is out there, it doesn't stay contained. It grows. Now it's not just about two superstars. Now it's about a whole generation of players who came up in this version of the game. Players who've been developed in systems built around spacing, skill, and protection. And suddenly, the question becomes bigger. Would any of them survive that environment? Or is this era producing a completely different kind of player? Because if you really follow the logic of what Bill Laimbeer is saying, it's not just aimed at the top. It's aimed at the foundation. The way players are trained. The way the game is taught. The way success is measured. Everything. Look around the league today and you'll see players with unbelievable skill sets. Big men handling the ball like guards. Guards pulling up from distances that used to be considered bad shots. Offenses that are more complex, more efficient, more precise than ever before. But at the same time, you don't see the same kind of physical battles defining games. You don't see teams trying to wear each other down possession after possession in the same way. The edge is different. The priorities are different. And that's where the divide really starts to show. Because now fans aren't just defending players, they're defending eras. One side looks at today's game and sees evolution, more talent, more versatility, a higher level of basketball overall. The other side looks at it and sees something missing, something that doesn't show up in stats, something that used to be part of every game whether you wanted it or not. And once that idea takes hold, it changes how people watch everything. A drive to the basket isn't just a play anymore, it becomes a comparison. A foul call isn't just a whistle, it becomes a debate. Every moment gets filtered through that lens. Would that have worked back then? Would that have been allowed? And now the conversation is everywhere. Former players weighing in, analysts breaking it down, fans going back and forth nonstop, and the lines get drawn fast. You've got people standing firmly with guys like LeBron and KD, pointing to dominance, longevity, and skill that's never been seen before. And on the other side, you've got voices echoing what Laimbeer said, arguing that none of it can truly be measured without factoring in what the game used to demand. And the truth is, once it reaches this point, there's no controlling it anymore. Because now it's not just a take. It's a movement, a debate that pulls in anyone who's ever watched the game, no matter what era they grew up in. And the more it spreads, the harder it becomes to ignore. And this is the part where the conversation usually gets uncomfortable, because if you really look at it honestly, it's not as one-sided as people want it to be. Because for everything Bill Laimbeer is saying about toughness, pressure, and physicality, there's another reality that's just as hard to ignore. Look at LeBron James. Over 2 decades in the league. Different teams, different systems, different expectations every single year. And through all of that, still performing at an elite level. That kind of longevity doesn't happen by accident. That's not softness. That's durability. That's discipline. That's adapting over and over again while the entire world is watching every move you make. Because the pressure today isn't just on the court. It's everywhere. Every game is analyzed. Every mistake is replayed. Every decision is debated instantly across the world. That's a different kind of weight to carry. And LeBron has been carrying it longer than almost anyone in the history of the game. Now look at Kevin Durant. Injuries that could have changed everything. Moments where his career could have taken a completely different path. And yet, he comes back and still looks like one of the most unguardable players on the floor. Same scoring ability, same confidence, same impact. That takes resilience. Not the same kind Laimbeer talks about, but resilience all the same. And that's where things start to balance out. Because yes, the 80s demanded a level of physical toughness that's hard to fully understand today. But today's game demands something else. Precision, consistency, the ability to perform under constant visibility where every single performance is judged in real time. So now the question shifts again. Because instead of asking who's tougher, you start asking what kind of toughness actually matters more. Is it the ability to absorb contact night after night? Or is it the ability to stay great while the entire world is watching, analyzing, and waiting for you to slip? And there's no clean answer, because both require something rare. Both require a level of mental strength that most players never reach. So maybe the real tension here isn't about proving one side wrong. Maybe it's about accepting that greatness doesn't always look the same. That what it took to dominate in Laimbeer's world isn't the same as what it takes to dominate now. And once you start looking at it like that, the argument doesn't disappear. It just gets a lot more complicated. And at the end of all this noise, all the clips, all the debates, and all the back and forth between eras, nothing actually gets fully settled. Because what Bill Laimbeer said isn't something you can prove right or wrong in a box score. It's a feeling, a belief rooted in a version of basketball that no longer exists in the same form. And that's what makes it stick. Because when he says players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant wouldn't survive that era, he's not just talking about skill. He's talking about environment, pressure, survival. But here's the part that gets overlooked in all of this. Greatness has already been proven in this era too. Over and over again. LeBron redefining longevity, carrying franchises for 2 decades, still performing at a level most players never even reach in their prime. KD coming back from injury and still looking like a cheat code on the floor, scoring in ways that feel almost unstoppable no matter who is guarding him. That is its own kind of survival. Just in a different battlefield. And maybe that's the real truth sitting underneath all of this. Every era thinks it was the hardest. Every generation believes they played in the most physical, the most real, the most unforgiving version of the game. But the game doesn't stay still. It evolves. It changes rules, spacing, speed, expectations, pressure, everything. And players don't get to choose the era they're born into. They only get to dominate the one in front of them. So when you strip everything down, when you remove the emotion and the nostalgia and the arguments, what you're left with is this: different eras, different rules, different definitions of greatness. And no matter how loud the debate gets, there will never be a perfect way to settle it. Only opinions, only perspectives, only sides. And that's why this conversation will never die. Because people don't just love basketball. They love comparing it, debating it, arguing over what matters more: skill, toughness, dominance, or survival. And as long as legends from the past keep speaking up, and stars from the present keep dominating, that clash will keep going, over and over again. And maybe that's the point, because the debate itself has become part of the game. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to HOOPRADAR for more deep dives, era debates, and untold basketball stories like this.